A Blessed Gift, Story 39, Crash Course by Caroline Kwok. In early 2003, SARS broke out in Hong Kong. The hospitals were in chaos, and right in the midst of this critical period, I discovered I had a tumor in my womb. I decided to return to Singapore for medical treatment. Immediately upon landing, I voluntarily placed myself in self-isolation in a hotel, my fears looming before me. Was the tumor malignant? Had the cancer spread? Would I be able to see my husband again in Hong Kong? It has been 17 years since, and early this year, once again, we are facing an even more sinister coronavirus, COVID-19. I returned to Singapore from Hong Kong for a break and found myself writing my faith story on Ash Wednesday, at the start of the Lenten season. I am a cradle Catholic, and like my mother, I spent 10 years of my student life in CHIJ, St. Nicholas Girls' School on Victoria Street. I joined the church choir from the age of 9 all the way till university and always participated in various church ministries and activities. However, not long after I entered the workforce, the attractions of the secular world held sway, taking precedence in my heart. But every now and then, whenever I felt my conscience prick me, I would bargain with the Lord. In my 20s, I said to God, Lord, I'm really busy now. I just don't have the time to pray more or do charitable deeds. If you let me work hard and earn more now, I can retire at 40 and spend my time organizing charity balls to raise funds for the poor. In truth, I was banking on God granting me early retirement and giving me plenty of opportunities to dress up and enjoy the life of my dreams. In pursuit of greater achievements in my job, I went to Indonesia and eventually got married and moved to Hong Kong. All the time, I worked non-stop. In my 30s, I said to God, Lord, it looks like I can't retire at 40. So how about 45? Please look after me so I can continue to make money. In 2002, at 39, I had just bought a new home and set up my own company. I was filled with ambition and all ready to realize my potential. Suddenly, the dot-com bubble burst, and I was overwhelmed by the subsequent work pressures. My dream of retiring at 45 was clearly impossible. Straight away, I added 10 years, telling God, I'll think about retiring at 55, then I'll serve you. A year later, the SARS epidemic hit Hong Kong and work came to a standstill. To add to my dismay, the doctor discovered a tumor in my womb and recommended that I undergo a biopsy to ascertain if it was cancerous. I was stunned. Not only had my income been cut back as my new company had only been operational for a short time, but I also had no health insurance. By all accounts, an extremely optimistic person, this setback felt as though the sky had fallen on me, and I truly began to panic. I was 40 that year, the age at which I had initially promised God I would serve Him. 3 months before leaving Hong Kong, fearing that it would be my last birthday, I threw a birthday party and invited lots of friends. 2 nights before my flight, while my husband and I were strolling along Causeway Bay, I decided to buy a few DVDs of comedies to occupy myself during my time of voluntary isolation in Singapore. As I entered the music store, the first DVD I saw had a cover picture of a woman dressed in white, staring unsmilingly at me. It was obviously not a comedy. Yet, for some unknown reason, I picked it up to read the synopsis, and to my surprise, it was about the protagonist's battle with ovarian cancer. Rooted to the spot, I felt a stream of cold air gush from my head down to my feet. This was not a supernatural event, but pure fear. Right at that very instant, the piped in pop music switched to heavy battle rock. Like a movie soundtrack, it matched the scene playing out in my mind's eye. Six little devils, three on each side of me, all of them jeering as if saying, "Finally, we have scared her to death." My husband, trying to console me, announced to the air around us, "If you have the guts, come out and fight. The one that hides in order to frighten others is a coward." I rushed home in fear. I realized that I had lost touch with my Catholic friends, but fortunately, I managed to get through to three Protestant friends who consoled me and prayed for me over the phone. Despite that, I still endured a sleepless night. I stumbled up the plane in a haste, and only when I was inside did I remember that it was Wednesday of Holy Week. For the whole of the Lenten season, I had done nothing. No self reflection, no prayer, no sacrifice. Nothing at all. Because of the epidemic situation, my mother had advised me not to stay in her home upon my arrival. This was because if I was already carrying the virus and she came into contact with me, she would not be able to see her young grandchildren. That year, those who contracted the SARS virus always presented with certain symptoms, unlike the sufferers of the present day COVID 19 virus, who may not show any symptoms at all. So, my self imposed quarantine was not because of the government's precautionary measures, but because of my own family's strict instructions. Thus, before I left Hong Kong, I had allowed the travel agency to arrange my accommodation, but I had not paid any attention to the details. I only knew that it was probably somewhere along Orchard Road, and I was even thinking that I could just step out of the hotel and do some shopping. Upon arrival in Singapore, I boarded a taxi and gave the driver the printed form with my hotel details, fully expecting to be driven to a location on Orchard Road. However, when the driver stopped outside Hotel Royal on Queen Street, I was momentarily stunned. When I alighted from the taxi, I looked up and my spirits immediately soared. Right opposite the hotel was the Church of Saints Peter and Paul, the church where Catholic students from St. Nicholas, including myself, had received the sacrament of confirmation. On my left across the road was the Cathedral of the Good Shepherd, and to my right, just a few steps away, was St. Joseph's Church. I remember that to both sides of the hotel were also Protestant churches. I recalled the pure fear I had felt 2 nights before when I had been beset on by devils. And now, here I was, surrounded by so many churches. Indeed, God had heard my cries for help. When I decided to undergo surgery in Singapore, I had started to make a list of 100 people, intending to ask them to offer a 3 hour prayer marathon for me during the operation. I was still upholding our Kiasu Singapore spirit. After adding all my Catholic and Protestant friends and my family members, I was still short. So I had decided that when I got to Singapore, I would contact the church friends and priests I had known in my youth. I knew that the priests are transferred to different parishes every few years, and although I had been out of touch for so many years, what I did have was time, and so I resolved to go seek them out. After I had dropped my luggage at the hotel, having nothing better to do, I decided to go and copy the Mass schedule. The mobile phones then did not have as many functions as those today. So I took a leisurely stroll to the Church of Saints Peter and Paul. Right at the entrance was a large horizontal banner with these enormous words: "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." I said to God, "Lord, I have received your message." After I had copied the Mass schedule, I walked over to St. Joseph's Church, and just as I arrived, the bell rang for the start of Mass. It was exactly 6 p.m. So I walked in and attended my first ever weekday Mass, because in all my life before that, I had never known of the existence of weekday Masses. After Mass, I walked over to the cathedral, and while I was copying the Mass schedule, a churchgoer noticed me and came by to chat, leaving me some health tips. Before he left, he said, "Since you're so free, come and join us for Mass at 10 a.m. tomorrow." At the time, I was thinking, why is there Mass at 10 a.m. on a weekday? Don't people need to work? The next day, during my breakfast, I recalled the invitation extended to me the day before and wondered if I should go. After a few moments of internal struggle, I decided I would attend the 10 a.m. Mass. When I arrived at the cathedral, I saw the Archbishop with more than 200 priests preparing to process into the cathedral. I was astounded, and when I looked inside, it was already completely packed. It was an extremely solemn Mass, and no wonder. It was the annual Chrism Mass, always held on the morning of Holy Thursday, the day before Good Friday. There would be the special blessing of the holy oils by the Archbishop, the oils that would be used in administration of the sacraments throughout the diocese for the year. At this Mass, all the priests would also reaffirm their priestly ministry by renewing the vows made at their ordination. The front pews had been reserved for the priests, and after the priests had taken their seats, there were still two empty pews. Just before the start of Mass, the Archbishop invited those still standing to take a seat in the front. And so I walked up and sat in the pew right behind the priests. In my excitement, I thought about the words on the banner I had seen and resolved to be the Lord's laborer. The best thing that happened to me was that when Mass ended, I had no trouble at all locating the priests on my prayer list, and I invited them to pray for a successful operation for me. Thanks be to God. During my time of quarantine in Singapore, I went daily to church to ask God to be lenient with me, not to call me up there too soon. One day, I went to the cathedral for the lunchtime Mass, and after Mass, a churchgoer came over for a chat. And when she learned of my illness, she told me not to be afraid, but to kneel in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, and the light from the body of Christ would bring me healing. And so, I also began to go to church for Eucharistic adoration. It was only later that I understood that spiritual healing is the most important healing of all. On another day at the cathedral, I saw a flyer on one of the pews and learned from it that there was a prayer group that met on Tuesday afternoon in the chapel of the Marymount Convent near Thompson Road, interceding for various people in need. So I took the flyer and found my way there. When I arrived, I saw several people lining up. The prayer team stood in a circle surrounding the person asking for healing. This was the first time I experienced up close this charismatic prayer method of laying on of hands. After this, I went back for almost every Tuesday session because I discovered that the sense of fear that had pervaded my heart was gradually diminishing. In the end, I was in Singapore for half a year and I did not have an operation. In fact, it was only at the end of 2014, after a retreat in India, that I had a hysterectomy. But that's another story. I can clearly see how God used an epidemic to bring me back from Hong Kong to Singapore, enabling me to set aside worldly interferences, giving me plenty of time through reading the Bible and religious books, as well as through church activities and church members, to seek Him, to encounter Him, to spend time with Him, and to build a closer relationship with Him. In my 40 years as a Catholic, I had not known about weekday masses. I had never been for Eucharistic adoration. And I had not known about the charismatic movement, nor witnessed the laying on of hands for the sick. I am a science student. Everything requires evidence and reasoned arguments to be proved. But all those big and small incidents that happened within those 6 months in 2003 made me re-examine my faith. God used the SARS crisis to give me a 6-month crash course in faith. Thanks be to God.